So we heard about this woman, Meghan. You shared her story. She was pregnant and she died, and her husband is actually charged with her murder. Tell us about what happened after this.
So Meghan wanted to be a mom. That was everything she wanted. She met Joseph, was from Florida, and traveled around the world with him. She had 3 kids. And then once they were on Fort Campbell, there was an alleged incident in October. Meghan was pregnant. She was rushed to Vanderbilt. There was an emergency C-section. The baby was saved and put in the NICU at Vanderbilt, and Meghan didn't make it. Her family decided she wanted to be an organ donor, so they did an honor walk where they walked her down the hall before she was going to donate her organs to save lives, and it was an extremely emotional moment. These women who are domestic violence survivors decided, we're not going to be silent any longer. We're going to be voices for Meghan. They started a Facebook page and started talking about domestic violence in the military and how bad it is. They shared their stories, and now they're advocating and begging for change in how the military handles domestic violence cases.
I heard all of these very powerful voices from young women who experienced very traumatic things. If you can, just kind of tell us a little bit about how this all started, where you began the story from the very beginning.
So when I'd first heard about the murder there, I started digging and asking questions. And I found this realtor who was also a military spouse, and she just had a lot of connections to the community because when these military families move there, they obviously need housing. So she started talking to all these women and found out that this wasn't just Meghan based, that there were other women who had been impacted by domestic violence. So I asked her, after I interviewed Meghan Santiago's family following the arrest of her husband, Joseph, I asked her, I want to do something bigger on this. Can you find me some other domestic violence survivors who are willing to talk? And it was kind of one of those heart drop moments. She goes, I put out a post and 60 messaged me. And that's
60 women that experienced similar types of traumatic experiences with domestic abuse.
And it made my hand shake. I was like, this is really scary that this is happening. And so I told her, I won't be able to tell everyone's story, but 2 who maybe have convictions and military protective orders and personal protective orders, I want to talk to them, because the last thing I would want to do is put these women in any more danger from their abuser or their alleged abuser.
I'm hearing you talk about military, and we're talking about Fort Campbell, in this case here. And it's hard for me to imagine that this type of stuff exists on base. Like, this is happening on base. It's not like just in somebody's home in somebody else's neighborhood. There are supposed to be some sort of protections behind this. I mean, did that catch you off guard, knowing that it was happening there?
Well, some of it is technically on post, but sometimes when they move off, it's happening there too. So the one girl in my story, the first one I interviewed, she was actually at Fort Wainwright in Alaska when the initial incident started on post. Other people were calling police for her. And then when she moved to Fort Campbell, no one knew her. No one knew him. No one knew this had been happening and that military police were involved. So the major issue is, and where I'd like to see change, is that they're moving around and there's no communication. Like, hey, this soldier has been under investigation here. It seemed like there was a disconnect, at least in her case, because it seemed like she needed to be monitored. So that was frightening.
I see. Okay. So there's no real checks and balances to make sure that these people are not continuing the abuse from one fort to another.
That's what I'm hearing. And obviously there's family advocacy programs on post at the hospitals, but whether they communicate is not something I'm aware of. And so the rhythm, or the stories I kept getting, they were all young. Most of these women, they were like 18, 19 years old, and, they meet a guy, and then they sign up for this life where they're like, okay, the military will take care of us. We'll just go from post to post. But they kind of, in a way, some of them surrender their lives because they might get a really good job, and then he gets deployed, and, they have to move something. They have to do permanent change of station. And it's really isolating because they keep picking up and they don't have like someone to turn to, like friends or family who they can go to and say, hey, if I ever text you a code word, things are getting violent, I'm scared for my safety. And that's something that is really scary, that they don't have, in a lot of cases, family or that support system on post to fall back on.
The first woman that you spoke to in the story, she talked a little bit about that, how she was fortunate to have even just some family. Didn't have to be, just like close family, just some family that's around that she could turn to, because there are a number of people who don't have that luxury, and they might fall victim to something and now they're stranded. I'm assuming that there were more cases just like that. But so I'm wondering, what was the reaction that you got from after the story aired? I know it just aired, but I mean, I'm sure that people have been reaching out just like they did early on.
The sad thing is, a lot of them have told me it's far worse than what was portrayed in the story, which is heartbreaking. Even someone messaged me from Hawaii, and she was like, you have no idea what I've been dealing with here. And so this is not just Fort Campbell. I mean, this is happening across the country, but the military has a different way of dealing with domestic violence. At Fort Campbell, they have a checklist. So they make them go down a checklist where if someone was to get beat up off post or something was to happen, they call 911, and immediately, police or the sheriffs can come and make an arrest. Where sometimes it seems like on post things aren't black and white. They're a little bit more gray in how they report. The two women I interviewed, they didn't even know that there was a family advocacy program on post until someone with the sheriff's office told them. And the only reason both of them got out and they were safe was because they ended up calling 911 off post. So they had Montgomery County and Clarksville police that came in. They obviously saw the injuries to these women, their face, and that's when arrests were made. I think a lot of times, as a reporter, we can't show a lot of the things in the stories, but I mean, these women have texted me like their pictures of abuse and their children's abuse, and obviously we want to protect the child, so I would never air like the bruises on the child's face or anything. But when you're reading through court documents and seeing, person took a door to the child and the mother's face, it's just, I can't imagine living through that.
When you were speaking to some of these people, did it feel like they were hesitant at first to open up to you? I mean, we're talking about some pretty personal things.
Yeah. So one of the people in my story, she canceled off and on, I think 3 or 4 different times. And
like the same day?
We joked about it now, in the same day. Yes.
Okay.
And so you know how it is with work when we are really passionate about a project and we're like, hey, instead of being in the mix today, can I have a day to work on this? And so that was my day. And she ended up calling a friend, and her friend was like, no, like, you need to talk. Your case has just closed. He's out of state. He's discharged from the Army. This is a way that you can start healing by sharing your story. So her best friend convinced her to still come and talk to me. So it's crazy how that works, but it was so hard. Out of 60, I got, 2 who were willing to go on the record and with their faces showing and share their story.
I mean, I have a tough time as it is on a regular day trying to convince any people, to talk about a story, much less, having 60 people reach out to you and then finding out that only 2 can really talk about the story to the degree that we would like them to. I guess I'm wondering, what were the challenges for you? Did you have any challenge trying to tell their story, knowing how personal this is to them and knowing how we're going to be able to put this out to the public?
Honestly, I had a lot of anxiety before it was going to air. And behind the scenes, the web team was like, can we post early? And then I was just worried that there'd be a fallout if they posted the web story before the video aired. And then I was like, maybe I'm just too in my head in this. And I think that was the case because it was very well received. But before something like that airs that you've literally poured like your heart and soul into for a month, it's like you don't want anything to mess it up, And a part of me was like also dealing with naming the abusers. And in the cases, one of the women really didn't want the name out there. There were still some safety concerns. So I was dealing with, well, I can't put one and not the other because then it kind of looks like I'm targeting one person. So I went through that moral, dilemma of like how to do this. And the more I thought about it was, we don't want to make this about those two convicted men. We want to make this about the women who are now finding their voice and they're finding a way to empower each other because of Meghan's story. They want to make sure that no one else like Meghan loses their life.
That video that you posted of, Meghan going through the hospital, I remember watching it for the first time and thinking, okay, so we're going to hear Alexandra explain what's going on. And then you stop talking. And I looked at the video. I was like, wait a minute, there's so much more video left. And it was like, you didn't have to say anything else. It was extremely powerful. And, I showed other people. I was like, I don't think I've watched a video where silence speaks volumes quite like that, and so I'm assuming when you posted that video, you saw the responses, you saw all the people coming back and talking to you and reaching out to you and commenting on it. What was that like?
I'm not sure if you've seen some of the comments, but there are literally women who are saying, I'm in a domestic situation right now on a base or a post, and this is what I'm dealing with, or I just got out of this. And it was shocking how willing they were to go public on TikTok. Wow. But yeah, in that video, I think there's light because Meghan wanted her last act to be donating her organs. And she was so little that they said she was actually going to be able to save children's lives in addition to some adult lives. And I believe she was 32 weeks pregnant. And so the baby was in the NICU at Vanderbilt. The baby survived. So that in itself is a miracle, especially after, the incident on Fort Campbell.
It's fascinating as it is hearing about her story, but then finding out just like the ripple effect of how we get to, people ask us all the time, I'm sure you've heard it, they ask, oh, where do you get your stories from? And it's stuff like this, like something may happen, other people reach out and tell us that it's a much bigger issue than what it appears at first. And so I'm wondering, where do you go from here?
I wish I could go somewhere. It's one of those things where I have some sources on Post who I really wanted them to talk, but essentially if they came out, they'd lose their jobs or it'd be like a whistleblower effect essentially in the military. And so I have been, behind the scenes, they might say, she doesn't have, any base or anything behind her to be covering this. But behind the scenes, I've been talking to people close to the situation on Post. And hearing the things that they're saying are really scary. And it's more about sexual violence than it is domestic violence, which we know from like the national news stories following what happened at Fort Hood, that is something that has been covered a lot. Where domestic violence, it really hasn't, because I feel like it's so gray. It's normally he said, she said. It's two people against each other. I feel like it's a lot more difficult to cover.
I see. Okay. I know that you used the Facebook Live from the folks in the military who were speaking about, in a roundabout way, speaking about domestic violence on base. Did you feel like they did as a good enough job kind of explaining what they do, their protocol, and how they address it on their end?
What was frustrating for me was I'd been asking for an in-person interview. I was like, please, I just sit down with me. There's people who are just really upset about Meghan's case. And I even said at a point when I was like, I understand scheduling is impossible. So I said, I have 10 minutes. Can any of the commanders jump on a Zoom interview with me and just answer a couple of these questions that I'm getting from women who want these questions answered? And then they came back and said, because of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we're going to do a Facebook Live. So I had to text them the questions. But as you know, that is not what we want to do. We want it to be like this, where we can bring their stories and, be the middleman to say, these women are worried about X, Y, and Z. What would you want to say to them? And it's so much different when you're in person than them trying to answer my questions that I had to text to a spokesperson.
I didn't realize you were actually texting them the questions at the time. That creates a whole nother wall that, you have to break down just to make it appear like, just to try to get the voice across. I mean, that's tough enough as it is. I'm wondering what do you think other people need to know about, not necessarily just Meghan's case, but, the state of trying to address domestic violence on base when you're talking about something as big as the military?
I think what needs to change is that when, some of these younger military spouses, maybe they text the sergeant, text the commander, and they're like, hey, this person's not right. They need to be taken seriously. Because what I was hearing time and time again was it wasn't like they never told anyone. They asked for help in their own way because they didn't know who to turn to. They didn't have anyone to turn to. And those people weren't reporting. So the people who knew the rules and knew where to go, they weren't reporting. And in a lot of domestic cases, most are like, why don't you just immediately call police or call 911? Yeah. Sometimes escalating the situation, escalating that puts your life in danger is how they feel, or it might put your child's life in danger. So at that point, they would rather do anything to de-escalate. It's easier to send a text like, hey, commander, I'm unsafe. I'm worried about my family's safety right now. This person's drunk. They're getting handsy with me. I don't know what to do. Those people need to immediately go to the proper authorities to report. And in the cases I'm hearing, they're not doing that.
Well, they're probably thinking that once you get police and law enforcement involved, you're undermining our authority and all that kind of stuff, rather than thinking about the safety and well-being of this person that just reached out.
Yeah, and they do have a 72-hour hold. So what they do is they'll take these soldiers out of their homes and put them in the barracks for 72 hours with other soldiers, and then they go back home. That's my understanding. And that seems really scary to me. That sure, you get some time, like a cool down period, but I just feel like I understand why they don't want to go through certain people because eventually they'll come back home anyways.
Well, yeah. I mean, and they might be even more irritated having spent 72 hours in the barracks, coming back home to deal with the person who sent them there. Exactly. That's got to be frightening. Okay. I didn't know about that. I think, a lot of this, I think, is going to be new for most people. We're talking about the military. It's not like we're talking about, just a small town community or anything like that. These are folks who are representing our military, and I would assume that there'd be more checks and balances. Doesn't sound like that's the case.
And I wish there were. I feel like a lot of people want to blame post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, hey, where were these people deployed to before these incidents? And I know that is a concern and mental health is a concern, but also just how drastic these cases are with court documents that I was reading about, like hurting a child and their own child, hitting their own child with a door, and the mom, it's awful.
I'm glad that we had this opportunity just to talk about something that obviously is very near and dear to you. So thank you. Thank you for stopping by and chatting with us.
Yeah, I appreciate this. And I know there's so many women and men from different posts across the country who are on TikTok. And this is definitely going to make them think twice about when they're seeing a red flag out there.